can a lover go but to the land of his beloved? And what seeker findeth rest away from his heart's desire?
In 1923, I first met our beloved guardian in Haifa. He was just a young man, then full of determination to carry forward the great work entrusted to his care. He was so spontaneous, so trusting and loving and outgoing in the buoyancy of his beautiful heart. Through the years, we all watched with wonder and ever deepening devotion to him and appreciation of his God-given gifts, the unfoldment of Baha'u'llah's divine order, which he built up so patiently and wisely all over the world. But, oh friends, at what great cost to himself. In 1951, when the beloved guardian called some of the friends to serve in Haifa, I began to learn of what he had passed through. His face was sad. One could see his very spirit had been heavily oppressed by the agony he went through for years during the period when the family pursued their own desires and finally abandoned the work of the faith and their guardian to go their own way. I can truthfully say that for a number of years, we who served him at the World Center seldom saw him smile. And very often he poured out to us his woes and confided some of the things he had passed through. I do not know in any great detail the day-by-day afflictions of Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha. But sometimes I wonder if they could have been any more heartbreaking than those of our beloved Shawki Effendi. The guardian had a profound and innate humility. Whenever the faith was involved, he was fiery in his defense, king-like in the loftiness of his bearing, the authority with which he spoke. But as a human being, he was self-effacing, would brush aside our adulation and praise, turn everything we wished to shower on him towards the central figures of our faith. We all know this characteristic of his, how he would never allow any photographs to be taken of himself or give any of himself, but invariably encouraged the friends to place the master's picture in their rooms, how he would not allow anyone to have his clothes or personal things lest they be regarded as relics, how he disliked any signs of personal worship, though he could never control what was in our hearts for him. The master said, O ye, the faithful loved ones of Abdu'l-Baha, it is incumbent upon you to take the greatest care of Shawki Effendi, that no dust of despondency and sorrow may stain his radiant nature. Neither his family nor the people of the world, nor I am afraid, we Baha'is, protected that radiant heart of Shawki Effendi. After the years of sorrow and trial he went through with the family after his final separation from them, there came a new joy and hope to our beloved guardian. The rapid progress made in the attainment of so many of the goals of the World Crusade lifted him up. How can I ever describe to you his eyes when he would come over to the pilgrim house and announce to us a new achievement? They sparkled with light and enthusiasm, and his beautiful face would be all smiles. Often he would send over one of his maps, and when it was spread out on the dining table, his finger, full of infinite insistence and determination, would point out the new territory opened, the new Haziratul Quds purchased, the new language translated, as the case might be. I feel it would be no exaggeration to say that it was the progress of the 10-year plan that gave him the encouragement to go on working so hard, for he was very tired. More than once he said during the last year of his life that his ministry had lasted longer than that of either Baha'u'llah or Abdu'l-Baha, and complained of the crushing burden. But none of us could foresee it presaged his release, that he was burned out with 36 years of struggle, of constant work, of sorrow, and self-sacrifice. His consciousness was like a fire burning in him. From his earliest childhood, he showed the sensitive, noble, painstaking qualities that characterized him, and grew stronger as he matured and throughout his guardianship. The friends should realize that Shawki Effendi had no foreknowledge that he would be appointed the successor of Abdu'l-Baha. The shock of the master's passing was followed by an even more terrible one, the shock of his own appointment as a sign of God. He grew in this supreme office, which we know was under the direct guidance of the 12 manifestations of God. Even as a tree grows to full maturity and bears goodly fruits, but at such a cost to himself of sacrifice that no one will ever properly estimate. Let us review for a moment, however briefly, some of the services Shawki Effendi rendered the faith of Baha. When Abdu'l-Baha passed away, the shrine of the Bab consisted of 6 rooms, surrounded by a small piece of land. The mansion of Bahji and most of its lands were in the hands of the covenant breaker or their friends, except for the Holy Tomb itself, which covers this very small area, and 2 pilgrim houses, one rented. The master himself, though so widely loved and respected, was not known as the head of an independent religion, but rather regarded as a Muslim, notable and holy man. The young guardian, freed by his very youthfulness, armed with the power conferred on him by his grandfather, cut with one stroke the bone still holding in appearance the Baha'is to Islam. He refused to go to the mosque. Tender, sensitive, crushed with grief, fighting his own inner battle to be reconciled to the glory of the station so suddenly revealed to him, Shawki Effendi began to do all the master had hoped to accomplish and to carry into effect his words when he hinted that after him the veils would be rent asunder. The perfect exemplar, the loving and forgiving father, had passed away, and the order of Baha'u'llah was now to take shape under the guidance of the champion of divine justice. With wistful eyes, the Blessed Master had gazed up at the shrine of the Bab and said that it was not possible to build the shrine of the Bab, but God willing, it would be done. The guardian first added 3 rooms during the early years of his ministry to make the building a 9-roomed edifice. In 1944, the model of the completed shrine was unveiled on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of the Bab's declaration. It had an arcade and a dome, both of which the master had stated it should have. By 1953, it was all built. Year after year, the guardian increased the size of the shrine gardens, himself laying out the design in its minutest detail. Patiently, persistently, he had the lands about it bought, designating each area, supervising each transaction, overcoming every obstacle. He got the mansion of Baha'u'llah away from the arch covenant breaker, Muhammad Ali, and turned it into a museum and holy place. He had all the Baha'i properties exempted from government and municipal taxes. He had the Baha'i marriage recognized and legally binding. He secured first the British and later, in a much stronger form, from the new state of Israel, recognition of the fact that this is a world religion whose holy places and whose world center are in Haifa and Akka, and that he, as the head of this faith, had a higher position than any other religious dignitary in the land. He chose the design himself and erected the monuments over the resting places of the greatest holy leaf, her mother and brother, and the wife of Abdu'l-Baha. He likewise specified the International Archives building should be of the type and proportions which it is, approving himself every detail and often changing details until he got them the way he wanted them. He located its exact position on the ground, the size of its walls and stairs, the garden surrounding it. This building will house precious Baha'i relics, such as no previous religion has ever possessed. Shoki Effendi, appealing direct to high government officials, secured Mazraya as a holy place for the Baha'i pilgrims to visit after it had been promised to other institutions when the Jewish state was formed. It was at his decision that the beautiful temple site of Mount Carmel was purchased in the spot Abdu'l-Baha had wished, and from the World Center streamed out the translations, the letters, the writings of the Guardian in a mighty flow in exquisite language, full of power, accurate, profound, inspired. Where are we? The hand of the Guardian was a motivating force. Let there be no mistake that any glove ever did the work of that hand. The gloves were poor and unworthy instruments, for the most part, well nigh useless judged by human standards. It was his hand in everything, from the littlest to the biggest thing, that grasped every work, initiated every enterprise, never relaxed, never relinquished its grip until the task was done. Many gloves frayed out on that powerful hand, fell apart, were of necessity cast aside, but the work of the cause went on uninterrupted until the last night of his life. The administrative order of the faith, the provisions for which were laid down by Baha'u'llah himself and amplified by Abdu'l-Baha, Shoki Effendi set out to build. When the master passed away, there were few spiritual assemblies in the world, not only one national body functioning, and only one national body functioning in a very rudimentary manner. The builder, however, had been provided by God, the great administrator, with an almost unique capacity for organization, with a wisdom vouchsafed from on high, with a world-encompassing vision set about the task, his task. Patiently, persistently, painstakingly, Shoki Effendi reared strong national bodies. He brought into being the International Baha'i Council, the embryonic Universal House of Justice. He kept the balance, the perfect balance between a thing too loosely knit, too individualistic to function efficiently, and too much efficiency, too many rules and regulations, too much running into endless and necessary detail, which is one of the great afflictions of present-day civilization. When he had created the system and reared the machinery of the Baha'i administrative order, he suddenly shifted the whole mechanism into gear. He called for the first 7-year plan, the first step in the promulgation of Abdu'l-Baha's divine plan, which is the instrument for the spiritual conquest of the entire globe. Plan followed plan. The scattered, diversified followers of the faith began to take shape as the army of Baha'u'llah, guided by the national spiritual assemblies, the pioneers, the vanguard, as he called them, of this great host, began to march out and over the world until at the half point of the mighty crusade he had launched, Shoki Effendi could look upon a united, strong, enthusiastic, worldwide community of believers who had already achieved the major part of the tasks he had set for them. What gifts he had, what gifts he gave, gleanings from the writings of Baha'u'llah, the Dawn Breakers, Nabi's narrative, the Kitab-i Khan, the hidden words, and the epistle to the son of the wolf, translations of superlative style and power, making available the essence of Baha'u'llah's message to the Western world. What life he breathed into us through his own writings, beginning with his world order letters, the goal of a new world order, the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, followed by the unfoldment of world civilization, now the world order of Baha'u'llah, the advent of divine justice, the promised days come, works which were supplemented by dynamic cables and special messages. To such a long list of distinguished works was added the finest flower of his mind, his masterful review of the first 100 years of the greatest dispensation vouchsafed by God to man on this planet. God passes by. His was the vision which looked at the cause as a whole, saw present and future as part of one mighty panorama. He not only collated the techniques, the teachings, but with a strong sense of history, assembled the most precious relics of the Baha'i world into religious archives such as no previous faith has ever possessed. He saw to it that all the precious sites associated with the Bab and Baha'u'llah and the heroes and martyrs of this cause were, whenever possible, purchased. The house where Baha'u'llah was born in Tehran, his father's house in Takur, the Siyah Shal, where the first rays of his divine mission fell upon him in the blackness of a dungeon, the house he occupied in Constantinople, and one of the houses he occupied in Adrianople, the bleak fortress of Maku, where the Bab revealed the Bayan, his shop in Bushir, and many other sites associated with him and his companions. At Shawki Effendi's instructions, an exhaustive photographic record was made of hundreds of these spots associated with the heroic age of the faith. He encouraged the Persian believers to compile the histories of the early days of the cause in their provinces and laid upon the Persian National Spiritual Assembly the great responsibility of collecting and transcribing the tablets of Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha, thus preserving for posterity a truly priceless heritage. He was truly the builder by nature. He completed the first Mashriq al-Athkar in America, the great Mother Temple of the West, unique in having had its foundation stone laid by Abdu'l-Baha himself. He initiated, chose the designs, and set in motion the plans for the erection of the African, the European, the Australasian, the Tehran, and Holy Land temples. He specified the sites for the National Hazir al-Quds and the national endowments. He named the languages into which the literature of the faith was to be translated, and personally encouraged the pioneers to go forth and fulfill Abdu'l-Baha's plan. Last, but he did more than this. He made each believer feel that over him watched the just mind and the loving heart, that he had a part to play, was precious to the faith, had duties to discharge, enjoyed privileges, infinitely precious because he was a member of the community of the most great name. Let us never forget this. Never lose sight of this. This oneness he made a reality. The staunch loyalty to our faith he implanted in our hearts. His work in this world is done. Ours is not. We are all, in a way, Shawki Effendi's heirs. We have inherited his work. His plans is completely laid out. Ours is the task to fulfill it. We must, each of us, complete our share of the world crusade. This is the memorial we must build to our beloved Shawki Effendi. Let us love him more now than ever before, and through the power of our love, attract his love to us and bring his blessing on our labors. Let us not fail him, for he never failed us. Let us never forget him, for he never forgot us. Anyway, this is a historic document, written, maybe 40, 50 years ago. But it shows, it concludes the biography of Amelia Collins, because she loved the Guardian so much, and she gave everything she had to make him happy, and that included helping him financially to make sure that whatever he needed to be done, to be purchased, she gave the funds for those things to happen. So that's the story of Amelia Collins. So Now we move to the next chapter, and that is we are going to read something about the life of the author of a famous book that we all read, and maybe we don't know much about who wrote it, details of his life, and that's Baha'u'lláh in the New Era, John Esslemont. The very well-known British Bahá'í that became a hand of the cause, and the Guardian loved him so much, and who suffered from bad health most of his life. And we're going to read a document written by Mujan Momin about John Esslemont, hand of the cause of God. This is it's a quotation that comes from I don't know if it comes from, I don't know. It says, "For by thy beauty of his character, by his knowledge of the cause, by the conspicuous achievements of his book, he has immortalized his name, and by sheer merit deserved to rank as one of the hands of the cause of God." That was Shoki Effendi. These words are the tribute of Shoki Effendi on the passing on 22nd November 1925 of Dr. John E. Esslemont. This year, being the 50th anniversary of his passing, provided a fitting reason to attempt to assemble the facts about different aspects of his multifaceted life. Dr. Esslemont was born on 19th May 1874 into a very distinguished family of Aberdeenshire in Scotland. His uncle, Peter Esslemont, became Lord Provost of the city of Aberdeen and a member of Parliament. And one of Peter's sons, George, was also a member of Parliament, while another, Dr. Esslemont's cousins, James Esslemont, became a member of the Land Court of Scotland. John himself was the third child and second son in his family and was named after his father, John Ebenezer Esslemont. His elder brother, William, was a solicitor, while his younger brother, Peter, as well as being a tea merchant, was a prolific writer of booklets on a diversity of subjects, such as the poet Robert Burns. William Gladstone, and the series entitled Stories Frey Aberdeen, consisting principally of jokes that he had collected. Peter Esslemont was an ardent promoter of world brotherhood, and urged by Dr. Lutfullah Hakim, also wrote an introduction to the Baha'i faith entitled A Life Plan, which was based on his brother's book and which was published in 1953. Peter Esslemont died in 1961. Dr. Esslemont was educated at Ferryhill School and Robert Gordon College in Aberdeen. He graduated from Aberdeen University in 1898 with honorable distinction in the degrees of Bachelor of Medicine and Surgery, having won a medal in clinical surgery and having been proximi accessit for the James Anderson Gold Medal and Prize in clinical medicine in his final year. From the very beginning of his life, Dr. Esslemont was a man of many and varied interests. He delved into many types of religious belief and occult systems before encountering the Baha'i faith. Indeed, in a letter written years later to George P. Simpson, he states that it was his constant inquiry into spiritualist thought that led him to the Baha'i faith. He was a keen advocate of Esperanto and was a founder and president of the Bournemouth Group, as well as a fellow of the British Esperanto Association. He was a good linguist, and apart from Esperanto, was fluent in French, Spanish, and German. When he embraced the Baha'i faith, he began learning Arabic and Persian so that he could study the most important writings of the faith in their original language. His secretary at the home sanatorium, Miss May Williams, remembers him conversing in Persian with the numerous Persian Baha'is who visited him. Dr. Esslemont made a brilliant start to his medical career. He was the first winner of the Phillips Research Scholarship and spent the latter part of 1899 at the Pharmacology and Physiology Institute of Bern University and at Strasbourg University, where he did some useful work in pharmacology, which was published. On returning to Aberdeen in December 1899, he continued his research work and acted as assistant to the Regius Professor in Materia Medica, J.D. Cash. He had, however, contracted tuberculosis in his college days, and it was this that eventually forced him to give up his research. This tuberculosis business, has affected also
Thomas Bakewell?
Yes, Thomas Bakewell. It's amazing how many people that thing affected and killed. We just forget about it, how prevalent it was in those years. So he contracted tuberculosis in his college days. In 1901, Esslemont went to Australia, where he spent 2 years. Prior to his departure, he had become acquainted with Miss Jane Fraser, his sister's music teacher. Miss Fraser was a brilliant pianist, and the couple were drawn together through their mutual interest in music. He had a tenor singing voice. They became engaged before Dr. Esslemont's departure, and it was arranged that she would join him if he decided to stay there. They were married in Australia on 19 December 1902. His marriage was not, however, all that he could have wished for, although he never spoke about this publicly. Initially, he lived in Wollongong, New South Wales, but then took up a post in Ararat Hospital, being also district surgeon and health officer to Alexander Country. In 1903, he returned to Aberdeenshire, where he spent the summer, but with the advent of winter, found it necessary for health reasons to proceed to South Africa, where it was hoped the climate would be more suitable. Here he acted as medical officer at the Natal Government Hospital, Durban, and later as district surgeon in Kroonstad. So I don't know what happened to that marriage. Anyway, he published 2 papers on his medical observation in South Africa. Esslemont returned to the British Isles in 1908 and obtained the post as the resident medical officer of the Home Sanatorium, Southbourne, Bournemouth, which was one of numerous such institutions set up for the treatment of pulmonary tuberculosis. It was and still is an imposing building, taking 22 male and 22 female patients and set in 10 acres of woodland. Its proprietor, Mr. Blandford, lived in London, and thus the day-to-day running of the house was left to Dr. Esslemont. This then, in summary, was Dr. Esslemont's medical career. It was felt by many of his colleagues that, in the words of the Gordonian, the college magazine of Robert Gordon College, only the handicap of his health prevented him from taking an outstanding position in his profession. The treatment of tuberculosis became one of Dr. Esslemont's principal interests, as well as being in the forefront of applying new techniques of treatment developed in Europe for the disease. He also developed a scheme for the total eradication of tuberculosis. His idea, which he first outlined in a letter to the editor of the British Medical Journal, developed in a series of articles in various medical journals, and finally presented in a paper that he read at the annual meeting of the British Medical Association in Aberdeen on July 30th, 1914, would probably have succeeded in its object had it been taken up by the medical profession and the government. Tuberculosis was at that time the scourge of the Western world. In Great Britain, 1 adult in 7 died of the disease. Among some workers, such as hotel servants, the figure was as high as 1 in 3 or 4. You know, we're talking about the COVID now, so just to go back and think of that, what that meant in those years. And the figure of 150,000 infectious cases at large in the community that was quoted was almost certainly an underestimate. Since it would be an impossible drain on the economy of the country to build sanatoria for the treatment of all the cases, Dr. Esslemont proposed a two-pronged plan for the eradication of tuberculosis. First, he planned using the methods of Professor Bang of Denmark to eradicate the infection among cows by segregating infected and uninfected herds, and thus achieving a milk supply free from the tubercle bacillus, which is the organism causing tuberculosis. Secondly, he advocated the setting up of garden cities where infected patients could live, be treated, and work while fit enough, thus helping to pay for the cost of these places. It was Esslemont's contention that apart from the initial capital outlay, these garden cities would have much lower running expenses than if a similar number of cases were treated in sanatoria, would be just as effective medically and much more pleasant for the patient. His work at the home sanatorium in Bournemouth took up a great deal of Esslemont's time, even to this day, 50 years after his passing. There are some alive who remember his devotion and care in the performance of his duties as medical officer there. Many a time he would be found staying up late into the night with a dying patient. He was a firm believer in maintaining the morale of his patients, and his great sense of humor was a prime asset in this. He constantly organized social events such as fancy dress parties to keep up the spirits of the patients in a place where many knew they had come to die. He took a great interest in his patients. Individually, he arranged, for example, for the publication of and wrote the foreword of Songs of Sunset, a collection of poems which were born out of the trance-like state to which one of his patients, Mrs. Mary Lister Baxter, would fall. Esslemont's interest in medicine was not, however, confined to tuberculosis. He took an interest in whatever came to his attention. As noted previously, whilst at Kroonstad in South Africa, he had reported some interesting cases in which he had been involved, including the outbreak of a scurvy-like illness in the Kroonstad Gaul. In February 1909, we find him reporting in the British Medical Journal the removal of a cherry stone from the ear of a woman where it had been impacted for 20 years. One of Dr. Esslemont's principal concerns was the necessity of setting up a state medical service. While the government and medical profession were embroiled in heated disagreements over a national health insurance scheme, he, together with a small group of far-sighted colleagues, was already looking forward to the next stage, a complete national health service. In 1912, Esslemont, together with others, including Professor Benjamin Moore, who was a professor of biochemistry at Liverpool University, who had achieved preeminence in this field through the book The Dawn of the Health Age, and Dr. Charles Parker, ear and nose and throat consultant at the Throat Hospital, Golden Square, London, set up the State Medical Service Association. The formation of this association was announced at the July 1912 meeting of the British Medical Association, and the new association had its first general meeting in October of the same year. Esslemont was a member of the executive committee of the association, and when in August 1913, the association brought out its own journal, The Medical World, he wrote the first article to be printed by this journal. This association compiled information and statistics which were presented to governmental Committee, the Consultative Council of Medical and Allied Services, and were found very useful by that committee. The committee produced the Dawson Report, which had been acclaimed by medical historians as one of the most important and far-sighted documents of the modern health age. Its recommendations were the foundation of the British National Health Service. In the 10th August 1912 issue of the British Medical Journal, Esslemont argued the case for the setting up of a state board of health with a minister of cabinet rank to coordinate and regulate the medical and allied professions. The proposals that he put forward in this letter were made part of the aims of the State Medical Service Association and were in part enacted in subsequent years by the government. It was in connection with his work for a state medical service that Dr. Esslemont first came into contact with the Baha'i faith. Catherine Parker, the wife of his colleague, Dr. Parker, who had become the secretary of the State Medical Service Association, the wife of his colleague, had met Abdu'l-Baha when the latter was in London and had become somewhat interested in the faith, although by no means a believer. So she brought up the subject of the faith during the course of a conversation with Dr. Esslemont in December 1914. He was immediately interested and asked for the loan of a few pamphlets. He said, "I was at once struck by their comprehensiveness, power, and beauty." He writes in the introduction to Baha'u'llah and the New Era, "They impressed me as meeting the great needs of the modern world more fully and satisfactorily than any other presentation of religion which I had come across." Actively and enthusiastically, he took up the study of this new religion. It was as though a flame had found a pile of dry leaves. Almost instantaneously, his soul was ablaze with the fire of the new revelation. Within months, he had procured and read many books in English on the subject and was even advising Catherine Parker on what books to read. In March 1915, only 3 months after first hearing of the faith, he kept the fast for the month of Allah, and on 5th March gave a talk on the faith to some 30 or 40 people at the Bournemouth Lodge of the Theosophical Society. In March 1915, he commenced a correspondence with Dr. Lutfullah Hakim, which he continued for the rest of his life, and which provides valuable glimpses of his development in the faith. In one of the earliest of these letters, he states, "The Baha'i teachings have filled me with new hope for the world. Just as the miracle of spring is taking place in the material world today, so I hope it will prove that a similar miracle of spring is coming in the spiritual and social world, and that Baha'u'llah will accomplish for the world of humanity what the material sun is doing for the flowers and trees." Mrs. Florence George, a London Baha'i, came to Bournemouth in March and April 1915, and again later in the year, and helped Dr. Esslemont establish the Baha'i group in Bournemouth. Together, they gave talks to various adult schools, groups, and organizations, and also started the regular Baha'i meetings. In July 1916, as soon as he heard of the appeal for funds for the Mashriq al-Adhkar of America, apart from making a generous personal donation, he set about raising subscriptions from the Bournemouth group and various friends throughout the country. Through his knowledge of and interest in Esperanto, he was able to communicate with Baha'is of all nationalities throughout the world, and during the last year of 1916, he, in conjunction with Dr. Hakim, translated the hidden words of Baha'u'llah into Esperanto. It is in his letter of 24th October 1916, written to Dr. Hakim in Esperanto, that Esslemont first mentions having commenced to write a book on the faith. He says, this is Esperanto for you, mi jam comencis scribadon de libro pri Bahá'ísmo. So, I guess that means I just started writing a book. So you're all invited to get into Esperanto and see how much you can pick up. So I am writing mi jam comencis scribadon de libro pri Bahá'ísmo. However, because of his commitments in the state sanatorium, progress was very slow, and it was not until February 1917, while Mrs. Stannard, an American Baha'i, was visiting him in Bournemouth and was able to give him some help, that any real progress was made. By May 1918, he had finished the chapter Health and Healing of his famous book, Baha'u'llah in the New Era, about halfway through the book. Among those whom Esslemont met in the Bournemouth area was Major Tudor Paul, who later took up a post with military intelligence in Cairo and was able to visit Abdu'l-Baha. On 19th November 1918, soon after the British occupied Haifa. So glowingly must Tudor Paul have spoken of Esslemont's services to the faith that same day Shoki Effendi penned the following letter to the Esslemont, thus beginning what was to become a deep and enduring friendship. Shoki Effendi writes from Acre, Palestine, 19th November 1980. My dear spiritual brother, praise be to God that the swords have been sheathed, the awful carnage has stopped. Although the war has brought untold difficulties and problems to the beloved, yet the outcome has been almost gratifying, for the Holy Land has been occupied by a just and victorious army. Remember, Abdu'l-Baha was still alive. This is 1918, and Shoki Effendi was working for Abdu'l-Baha, and he wrote to him. Captain Tudor Paul, the beloved of Abdu'l-Baha, arrived today at Akka, and how deep our pleasure and surprise has been. He mentioned your name to the beloved and mentioned your untiring services to the cause. How gratified the beloved was to hear that. He prayed for you and asked his Heavenly Father for confirmation and help. I secured your address from Captain Tudor Paul, and I now hasten, although late at night, to open a correspondence with you, which shall be continuous, inspiring, and regular. Awaiting your detailed letter, yours in his name, Shoki. He was not the guardian at that time. On 17th December 1918, Shoki Effendi forwarded via Tudor Paul the translation of a tablet revealed by Abdu'l-Baha the previous day for Dr. Esslemont. Esslemont received this tablet early in January 1919. This is from Abdu'l-Baha. To his honor, Dr. Esslemont, upon him be greeting and praise, O thou, lover of all mankind. Verily, have I chanted thy verses of praise to God, inasmuch as he hath illumined thine eyes with the light of guidance, the light of the oneness of the world of humanity. So much so that thy heart overflowed with the love of God, and thy spirit was attracted by the fragrance of God, and I supplicate divine providence, that thou mayest become a torch to that gathering, so that the light of knowledge might shine out from thee, that thou mayest be confirmed to act in accordance with the significances of the hidden words, and strengthened by God under all circumstances. Concerning the book you're editing, send me a copy thereof. I pray the Lord to support thee in the service of all humankind, irrespective of race and religion. Nay, rather, thou shouldst deal with all according to the teachings of Baha'u'llah, which are like unto life to this glorious age. Upon thee be greetings and praise. Abdu'l-Baha Abbas. Dr. Esslemont replied immediately to Abdu'l-Baha, forwarding the first 9 chapters of his book and stating that he had committed the tablet to memory and hoped to translate it into life. Dr. Lutfullah Hakim was proceeding to Haifa in July 1919, and Dr. Esslemont dearly wanted to go with him. I would have liked to have come with you, he writes on 20th of March, but he tells me to bring the whole book with me when I come, and I'm afraid it will take me a good many months to finish it. During the summer of 1919, he completed arrangements for the printing of the 5th chapter of his book as a separate pamphlet entitled, What is a Baha'i? This was done on the instructions of Abdu'l-Baha, following a suggestion by Miss Rosenberg. Eventually, on 16th October 1919, Esslemont departed from London on his way to Haifa. He traveled overland via Paris and Rome and sailed from Brindisi by the Lloyd Triestino steamer, the Baron Cole, on 23rd of October, arriving in Haifa on 5th November. But because of quarantine restrictions, he did not meet Abdu'l-Baha until November 6th. Miss Edna True, who was accompanying her mother, Mrs. Corinne True, on pilgrimage, describes thus their fortuitous meeting with Esslemont. We were to sail from Naples to Alexandria, going from there to Cairo by train and continuing from Cairo to Haifa on the railway used until very recently for the British Army. In Naples, we were informed that our steamer would sail from Bari across from Naples on the Adriatic Sea. And so we proceeded by train to that port, arriving during the evening. At breakfast the next morning in the hotel dining room, Mother and I noticed a gentleman, obviously British, and Mother thought she saw a Baha'i ring on his finger. She then recalled that she had heard of the contemplated visit of Dr. Esslemont to the master and expressed the thought that this might be he. We finished breakfast first and went to our rooms. Very soon we heard footsteps on the tile floor of the hallway and a knock on our door. With a beautiful smile on his face, Dr. Esslemont entered and asked if this could possibly be Mrs. Corinne True of Chicago, as the master had told him that she would be traveling to Haifa with one of her daughters. Dr. Esslemont had been booked on another steamer than ours, scheduled to sail a day or two after our ship, but because of another delay in both sailings, we spent a couple of days together at Bari. I recall our lovely walks together and talks about the faith and the current world conditions, and I found him to be the most delightful and, though quiet and reserved in manner, a stimulating companion. Our steamer, as I remember, sailed a day before Dr. Esslemont's, so that we had arrived and settled in Haifa by the time he came. The Trues, who were the first Western pilgrims to arrive in Haifa after the war, reached there on 2nd November. And shortly after they left on the 11th November, a further group of American pilgrims arrived on 16th November. Soon after this arrival, in Haifa, Dr. Esslemont's health deteriorated and he was unable to attend many of Abdu'l-Baha's talks. Each day, however, Lutfullah Hakim came to him and gave him an account of Abdu'l-Baha's utterances, which Hakim had been taking down verbatim. It was not until about 27th November, when this latter group of Americans was about to leave, that Esslemont was well again. The group of Americans who arrived in 16th November consisted of Mr. and Mrs. Randall, their daughter Margaret, whom Abdu'l-Baha named Bahiye, Albert Vail, George Orr Latimer, Arthur Hathaway, and Fujita, a Japanese Baha'i that was working for Abdu'l-Baha, who had joined the party at Naples and was coming to serve in Abdu'l-Baha's household. Among the Persians present in Haifa during those days were such far-famed names as Azizullah Khan Barkha, Haji Mirza Haidar Ali, the hand of the cause Ibn Asdaq, Mirza Mahmud Zarkani, Mirza Muhammad Hussein Vakil, and Mirza Asadullah Fadil. Each of these Esslemont questioned carefully, gathering information and stories, all the time accumulating material for his book. Among Esslemont's papers, which were forwarded to England after his passing and which are now among the archives of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United Kingdom, there exists a series of brief accounts of the history of the faith in various countries written by the Baha'is whom Esslemont met on this pilgrimage. But the most important source of material for this book was, of course, Abdu'l-Baha. Each day before dinner, there would be a brief meeting at which prayers would be chanted and Abdu'l-Baha would give a short talk. Afterwards, for dinner, and most days for lunch also, the pilgrims would gather at Abdu'l-Baha's table. While the Americans were present, Esslemont, when he was well, would occupy a place opposite Abdu'l-Baha, and once they had left, Abdu'l-Baha seated Dr. Esslemont on his left. On these occasions, Dr. Esslemont and the Americans would continuously ask Abdu'l-Baha questions. The answers were taken down verbatim by Dr. Hakim and translated by Shoki Effendi. Each day, the group would, in conjunction with Dr. Hakim, go over the notes which he had taken, and each would transcribe the translated utterances of Abdu'l-Baha. Early on the morning of 21st November 1919, Dr. Esslemont